Endings are arguably the most important aspect of writing a story. If you don't believe me, just look at what happened to the Game of Thrones TV show. That show was a cultural phenomenon. It just had people tuning in every week to find out what happened in this epic world. People who weren't even fantasy fans were interested in what happened in the Game of Thrones. Everything about it was done with just seeming perfection until... Now the show is virtually unwatchable because I know how it ends, which is a bummer because that's a show I probably would have had on repeat for the rest of my life. The way people watch The Office, I probably would have watched Game of Thrones. But instead, I had to resort to looking up a fan ending on Reddit so that I could have some measure of closure. Contrast that to an ending like Breaking Bad, and you kind of start to see the lost potential. So in this video, we're going to talk about the different types of endings and my advice for writing a satisfying conclusion. Now, there are four main types of endings to a story. The first one is the never ending. Sticking with the same theme of TV shows, let's take a look at what I mean by never ending. We've got shows like The Walking Dead, Doctor Who, Grey's Anatomy, shows that have gone on well past their prime, but still manage to maintain a small, loyal fan base to keep it going forever. I hate never ending so much. I used to be a fan of The Walking Dead, but it just got so repetitive and boring and unbelievable. And how can you rewatch a show that just never ends? You can't. You're trapped. How can you relive that nostalgia? And even when it does finally end, who cares? They're probably just going to make 17 spin-offs off of it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's still going to be never ending. Now, applying that to book, that's kind of how I feel about series like The Wheel of Time or the Cradle series. People have made very compelling arguments for why I should read these series and how they have satisfying conclusions and that it's really compelling and, oh, there's only a few books here or there that are kind of slow. But after a certain point, that many books just feel so unnecessary to me. Why do we need so many books to tell these stories? Why do I have to invest so much time and energy into a series without ever knowing if it's going to come to a conclusion? At least with Brandon Sanderson books, the different series can be read as standalones within the larger universe. So you don't actually have to commit to the entire Cosmere if you just want to read Era 1 of Mistborn, or if you just want to read the Stormlight Archive. Now, there's little tidbits, hidden within the rest of those series so that they all connect. But if you don't want to get invested in the entire universe, you don't have to. Which is basically the solution for this type of ending. If you insist on dwelling within your world or your universe, at least give us a few different series within that world or universe that can just stand on its own 2 feet. Like I said, you can have Easter eggs that are part of the larger scheme, but just don't make the rest of us suffer through it in order to get an ending. Please. The second kind of ending is kind of an oxymoron because it's the no ending.
Our favorite kind.
This is obviously the worst type of ending because technically, there is no ending. Anyone else watching this video have readers PTSD? I should really run a poll to see which cliffhanger books pissed readers off the most. Game of Thrones, Name of the Wind, Lies of Locke Lamora. Now, I don't think that we'd be so mad about not having an ending if the books were terrible. But they were so good and they were written so well. You lured us in under false pretenses. And now we're left with a hole that only you can fill that you just let us leave vacant. Please finish your stories. Now there are two solutions to this. One is you can have a very clear plot for your series. Things can obviously change as you write it, but you as the author have a general idea of what everything is building towards. The second option, if you insist on being a pantser, is to write the entire series before you publish anything. This is sometimes referred to as a rapid release strategy in the self-publishing space, where you can then decide how you want to release your books after they've all been written. But that maybe is for another video. But the point is, just don't write a banger and then peace out on all of us. We don't need any more trauma in the fantasy community. Thank you. The third type of ending is a bad ending. I would argue that bad endings are still better than no endings, because then at least we can have closure, even if it does piss us off. And the other thing to keep in mind is endings are subjective, and they're open to interpretation. So a bad ending to me might not be a bad ending to someone else. Let me just give one example here. Joe Abercrombie, author of the First Law trilogy, is one of the best authors I've ever read when it comes to the actual characters in the story. They just feel so real. The dialogue feels super grounded. Their personalities are super stark from one another. When you read different POVs in his books, they feel vastly different from one another, from the tone and the style. It just is so immersive. He is super talented with his character work. And because it's so realistic and he writes in a grimdark style, things would happen in that series that honestly would sometimes make me sick to my stomach. Without going into spoilers, basically some of the things that Logan Ninefingers would do in his berserker mode, were just devastating. They made sense, and it actually made me have a stronger connection to the reality of these characters. But man, was it brutal. I just couldn't argue with the decisions of the characters as a reader because they made sense. They were so well done and so well executed. But when I finished that trilogy, I literally threw the book down. I was so mad, and I swore I would never read a Joe Abercrombie book ever again in my life. That's how pissed off I was at the ending. I wanted to give it such a bad review because I hated so much how that trilogy and that series ended. That's how much I hated it. That's the visceral reaction that I had. But over the years, I've thought a lot about that series. And I've actually, over the years, come to appreciate that ending as one of the best grimdark fantasy conclusions that I've ever read. I just feel like I needed more time to maybe process it. But yeah, so I initially would have called it a bad ending. But as time has gone on, I didn't like the ending, but I would actually argue that it's a good ending. So the solution to that is write an ending that you, as the author, will be happy with. You just never know what's going to resonate with readers, but if you're happy with it, that's all that matters. And the fourth type of ending are the great endings. Huzzah! What better way to end talking about endings than to just give praise to the stories that just lifted our souls to a higher plane of euphoria. Obviously, having a great ending is going to be one of the biggest challenges to pull off as an author. Because like I said, art is very subjective. It's hard to have a universally accepted great ending. And on top of that, the more anticipation there is for an ending, I feel like it's going to be that much harder to satisfy that craving. Like, honestly, if George R.R. Martin finished Game of Thrones and he wrote it exactly the way that the TV show ended, would we be satisfied with that? What if that's how he really envisioned the end of his story to be? With so much time passing, I just think that people get really invested and they want it to end a certain way. So probably a better example would be Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive. Now, I haven't read Wind and Truth yet, but I have seen a lot of mixed reviews for the conclusion to that era 1 of the Stormlight Archive. The point is, it's actually really difficult for anyone to nail an epic landing to their story. Not impossible, but certainly a challenge. And it definitely gets harder depending on the scope of your story. But again, it'll be more likely to be successful if you have some type of plan for the conclusion of your story. I would define something as a great ending if it's a story that doesn't drag on and makes you want to read it again in the future. Some examples of that for me would be, if we're talking about a TV show, Avatar: The Last Airbender. 3 seasons, phenomenal ending. I rewatched that show all the time. It just left me wanting more, but it was also super satisfying and gave us hope for what happens in that world. We're not going to talk about the Legend of Korra right now, okay? We're going to pretend we're just not going to talk about it. From a reading perspective, the Night Angel trilogy by Brent Weeks was one of my favorites when I was younger, and I still loved it when I reread it recently. The Faithful and the Fallen series is another one that is so nostalgic for me, and I love thinking about that series, and it does make me want to read it again in the future. In short, we as human beings need conclusions. I think we're just hardwired for it. We crave finality, even if it scares us or makes us angry. Perhaps that's why we pursue them, because they leave us feeling, something that we can't obtain in any other way. And endings are just a natural part of any cycle. Now, we want to make sure we're all writing great endings. So here are just 4 quick tips of how to write a satisfying conclusion. Condensing a great ending into just 4 tips is a little ridiculous, let's be honest, but it should at least allow for a framework that you can follow and adapt based on your unique circumstances. So the first one is to deliver on your promises. If you haven't watched Brandon Sanderson's university lectures on writing, stop watching this video and go over there. He has way better writing advice than I could ever give. But in his series, one of the things he often talks about is promises and payoffs. Basically, throughout your story, you should be making promises to the reader. Even something as simple as the tone of your story is a promise. And these promises need to come full circle if you want the reader to be satisfied. If you promised a dark, grim fantasy, you better be prepared to kill the main characters or let the villain win. If you promise the chosen one will save the world, there better be a natural progression and epic conclusion to that prophecy. If you promise the enemies will become lovers, then they better be frolicking through the field at the end of the book or doing something else, depending on your spice preferences. Every major question, prophecy, or character arc you've built should pay off in a meaningful way. The reader has invested in the mysteries, the conflicts, and relationships, so you need to make sure that those resolutions feel earned, not rushed or just conveniently solved for the sake of the ending. Tip number 2. Show the progress. This ties in with promises, but it should serve as more of a contrast to the beginning of your story. What has changed over the course of this adventure? What have we learned? What have we lost? Building a great fantasy conclusion means you need to highlight the impact of the character journey on their circle of influence. That could be their local business, the magical landscape, the political climate, the people and culture. If we were to go back to the beginning of the story, we should be able to see a stark difference, either in the character or in the world around them. Think of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. Frodo and Bilbo Baggins start as carefree hobbits that mostly keep to themselves. And by the end of it, they understand adventure. They understand the costs of war and death. They just are dramatically different. So when you put them back in the Shire with all the things that they've learned and done, you can see the difference in them. Name of the Wind also does an excellent job of this. We get to see the current state of the world, which lets us know that there must have been some kind of tragedy in Quoth's life to get him to the point of being just a humble barkeep. It's the contrast of these incredible adventures and stories that he's telling that makes his current situation as a barkeep so mysterious and intriguing. Now we just need an ending to that series, and I can actually give it some praise. The third thing that I think makes a great ending is to allow for some ambiguity. Yes, we want answers to the main questions of the story. That's part of delivering on your promises. But it's okay to leave a few slivers of mystery for the reader. This gives your story a sense of wonder and almost makes the story feel like a living thing that allows you to draw your own interpretations and conclusions. It gives you something to talk about with other readers to see what they think. That's really what That's really what builds community. And a following for your works is to allow that ambiguity so that these readers that are loving your stories have something to talk about with each other and something to speculate on. Now, that doesn't mean having an ending that is so ambiguous that it becomes an unsatisfying cliffhanger like Inception. You have to have a very unique premise for something like that to work. But just allowing for there to be small, lingering mysteries can make a big impact. Like with the Sword of Kaigen. The mother makes the decision to make her relationship with her husband work, despite all of their challenges and grief. We get glimpses of what that's going to look like, but we won't actually be there to see how that all unfolds. The Oathsworn Legacy has a satisfying ending because one of the characters revisits a special place from his past and has an important conversation with himself, kind of a self-reflection conversation. So we kind of get a glimpse of his regrets, but also what the future holds for him. It gives us hope even though we don't know exactly where his path is going to lead. Demonology and the Art of Pickling Demons completely upends the life of the main character and basically makes him start over. But there's a sense of trust that everything's going to work out because everything we saw throughout that story. So it's a little bit bittersweet. So those are just a few examples of endings that I've read this year that I thought did a good job of keeping that ambiguous resolution. It's what makes us feel as readers. And the fourth thing, which I've kind of touched on a couple of times, is just to start with the end in mind. This can be really as simple as asking yourself, what do I want my readers to feel by the time they reach the end of this story? Do you want them to be sad but hopeful? Then maybe there should be some element of a noble sacrifice. Do you want them to be frustrated? Then maybe we discover the villain was disguised as the hero all along. Do you want them to be inspired? Then maybe we get to see how the antagonist redeems himself by the end of the book. And you don't necessarily have to be a plotter to still have an ending in your mind. Many authors get their stories inspired by the great battle that comes at the end. And now they have to figure out what's the story that leads them to that point. But if you know what you want to accomplish early on, then you can always have that in the back of your mind as you're crafting this story. In my opinion, endings are the keystone of your writing. Everything rests or falls upon the finale you create. I think that's why a lot of authors get intimidated when they get such a big following for their stories and they haven't written an ending yet. That pressure breaks them because they don't want to disappoint their loyal fans. So no pressure. But remember, reading is a very personal experience. So there will be likely a wide range of opinions on the matter. So long as you're satisfied with the ending, that's all that matters. Just give us an ending, please. I will take a good or a bad ending over the never ending or no ending option any day of the week. Don't embark upon publishing a series unless you are confident you can finish it. I'll have a rant on that in a future video, so stay tuned for that. But that'll do it for today's video. If you enjoyed this one, be sure to join the Indie Fantasy Club and go check out my playlist for other writing tips for aspiring authors. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.